one of the things that, that I've decided to do is actually lean into this question. I think I've been very lucky over the past 25 years seeing how technology has played out, and I've made some good guesses. But I think that actually machine consciousness is going to become very important over the next decade. And so I've started the research company on the side. Happy to talk about this later on if you want. That
No,
is,
we
that is
can we can we can get into it a little bit now.
right.
This is Contium, I guess.
Conscious,
Yeah.
that's right, yeah, and so one of the big questions, or a couple of big questions that we have in the field of AI is the first question is the control problem. Could we build a super intelligence that we can control? And my instinct is that the answer is no. It's like trying to control a god. But there is another concept called the alignment problem. Could we align an AI, a super intelligence, with human values, or some value system? It doesn't necessarily have to be human values like altruism and cooperation and sacrifice and all this kind of stuff. And I guess how people think currently about AI is that you program something or you train something, and where it goes wrong, you try and put kind of plasters in place to try to mitigate those risks. It's like playing whack-a-mole, right? You have to kind of knock it down every time it goes wrong. And I actually have some ideas about how we might be able to evolve AIs. We've evolved, our species and other species have evolved over the past 2 billion years, where we've had to cooperate for our genes to be passed into the next generation. We've had to be altruistic, we've had to be sacrificial. And those are not programmed, they are embedded into the being of our bones and our neurons. And I think that we could evolve AIs in environments and have those AIs have to survive by cooperating, by sacrifice, and all these kind of things. And instead of programming AIs to have a value system, we might be able to embed value systems into their neural structure. Now, I'm not arguing that that's going to be completely robust. It might be that it decides to not align with those values, but at least you would start out from a point where you had a value system embedded. And I actually think that there's a new emerging technology that I've been tracking for the past 2 decades called neuromorphic computing. So
Hmm.
large language models are not really how our brains work. They're called neural networks, but they're really not how our brains work. Our brains operate on the power of a light bulb. We learn very quickly. We're very adaptable. And these neuromorphic technologies that are appearing, also called spiking neural networks, actually could lend themselves to AIs that are aligned, but also might start to exhibit conscious behaviors. I think there's two big interesting questions that we need to face over the next decade. One is humans are going to start attributing consciousness to things that are not conscious. Now, that may be problematic, it may not be. We've all seen the movie Her. And the other question that we need to ask ourselves is that if we inadvertently build machines that are conscious and not realize it, we could be putting those things in torturous or traumatic situations. And in some respects, we have a duty of care not just to humans or to animals. We potentially have a duty of care to AIs to make sure that they don't suffer. Nick Bostrom coined the term mind crime. So I think this is a really an important set of questions we need to be facing into.
You did manage to get a lot of content into that. I am trying to race to keep up in my notes and all the kind of follow up questions that I have. So I want to start with Contium. Or I should also say that we've gone off on an avenue. We will come back, so don't worry,
Sure.
listeners. We were going through that PESTLE framework corresponding to the singularity. So we'd gotten through political, environmental, and social, what you call there the Methuselarity, which is super
Yeah.
fun. And then we started on the fourth one, which is the technological singularity, which is the one that probably most people associate directly with the singularity, their mind currently being expanded in this episode to these other kinds of singularities. But that is the creation of an artificial super intelligence, which exceeds our capabilities. And so you have recently created Contium to because of your keen interest in studying the consciousness of machines. I like that idea of avoiding. You said the Nick Bostrom term. What was it? Mind
Mind
crime.
crime.
Mind crime. And so that's cool. I like that a lot. Um, it is interesting to me that this was a recent conversation with Elon Musk, and hopefully you are, probably his thinking has evolved on this as well. And no doubt people like you end up influencing him on these kinds of topics. But it was maybe about a year ago where he opined publicly that the way to avoid terrible outcomes at the singularity is to create a super intelligent machine that is maximally curious, which seemed to me to be maybe a little bit maybe a little bit simplistic. As you described there, it is probably more like a complex whack-a-mole. And something that I kind of think of in my mind, you can correct me on this because you spent a lot more time thinking about this than I have. But when I try to reassure people about the creation of a machine that is more intelligent than us and how that can probably be done in a way that is safe, there are other kinds of systems that humans have created over the past millennia that are out of the control of any individual: governments, militaries, the stock market. And so there are these kinds of things, and bad things happen. And it is like a whack a mole of, oh, like that was a mistake. So, stock market collapse, and lots of people lose their livelihood, and people are jumping out of skyscrapers, and we figure out, okay, we need independent central banks in order for this to work. We need these kinds of financial regulations. We need to make sure that banks have a certain amount of security to avoid stock market collapse. And I mean, stock market collapse sounds bad, but governments and militaries have led to much bigger calamities. The 20th century had a huge amount of death and disaster from war. And so, political systems get out of control. You can't get somebody out of power. And then all of a sudden they're rolling their tanks into your country and killing certain people within your country. And so obviously things can go awry, but it does seem like that whack a mole that we're doing iterates in the right direction. With artificial intelligence, it seems like we're at a point where there are a lot of people trying to figure out where those biggest whack-a-mole problems are in advance. And we are fortunate to, at this time in human history, have more brains on the planet than ever before. Those brains have more free time than ever before to be thinking about things, because we're not just tilling the fields as an illiterate peasant like we would have been most of our history. Statistically speaking, that's like you're just trying to subsist. Um, and so all these humans, all this thinking time, where many of us, billions of us, are connected in real time over the internet, hearing new ideas over podcasts, archive papers, GitHub code repos. And so there's this opportunity to get ahead of the biggest whack-a-mole issues around AI, and it leaves me feeling optimistic. So I just talked for a really long time on your episode. I don't know if you want to dive in and
Nothing,
pick
nothing
apart
at
some
all.
parts.
Actually, it sets me up really nicely for the final singularities. Maybe we'll come on to in a minute. But just to go back to this idea of curiosity, which is what Elon mentioned, which is one of the reasons perhaps we are curious is because it is evolutionary beneficial for us. There's an idea in consciousness called the free energy principle that was coined by a chap called Carl Friston. And what we're ultimately trying to do is we're trying to minimize our perception of the world versus actually what happened. So we expect something to happen. It doesn't happen in the way that we want it to happen, and we need to learn or be conscious about essentially that delta. And so curiosity, I think, is a really important mechanism for us to be able to be an adaptive and a more effective species. And one of the questions is, how do we evolve agents to be inherently curious and not just programmed to say, what is that? Ask the question, what is that? If it sees something that it doesn't know, I wanted to have the inherent desire, innate desire to want to learn things in the way that I guess humans and other animals do. So I think absolutely curiosity is a very interesting question to answer over the coming years, and it'll be part of obviously Contium's thesis as well. I should say that I did my PhD 20 years ago in modeling bumblebee brains. Bumblebees have 1 million neurons, and even looking at AI or agents, biological agents that have very, very small brains, they can do phenomenal things. And bees are curious. They have to, of course, explore their landscape to be able to find and forage new things that are beneficial for the hive. They also have sacrifice and altruism and all this kind of stuff. So even with very, very, very small brains, we can do lots of interesting experiments around these questions.